Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of All Things IDA. In today's episode I'm going to be giving a first look at IDA 9.2 Beta 1. Now keep in mind this is just a beta and what you'll see is probably gonna change. As far as I know, this beta run might take a month, and during that month hopefully you users give feedback to shape the final version of 9.2. So I'm gonna focus on the beta 1 list from the website and highlight the upcoming features. But again, things might change, so expect another update video in the future. With that, let's get started. Okay, let's get started with the top of the list. The first thing here, UI improvements, jump to anywhere. Now, this is supposed to let you jump not just to one particular kind of items. So here it says currently we index functions, local types, names, segments. And later with an API you can extend that index. So here the idea, instead of having to be in the correct view, let's say if you are in disassembly view or decompilers, then you can jump to functions. And if you're local types, then you can jump to types and segments and so on. So you had multiple different dialogues for different navigation. So with the jump anywhere, we're supposed to be able to invoke it. Right now it's configured with Ctrl-Alt-F, and otherwise later we can go to the feature flag and override the G hotkey, which was used to jump to an address. So hopefully the jump anywhere will take us anywhere. Alright, so I'm gonna invoke it. I'm gonna press Ctrl-Alt-F, for example. Here, EH is gonna search for stuff that has EH, and we can see we have functions here with the icon, and we have some types. So already we can see it is finding multiple things. Even for example, let's say DB, we have the functions here, DB3, DB, and we have a type here, which is DB header, for example. We can also jump to segments as per the documentation. So Ctrl-Alt-F, and if we say dot, and we have, for example, our data or text, which you normally I would have to press Ctrl-S to jump to the segments. So now just one key and navigate where you want. So let's go back to main, for example. So that's the jump anywhere. It's its first version. I'm sure it's gonna mature over time. Second thing on the list here is unified location history. This is supposed to let us navigate between different widgets. Normally, if we're in the disassembly, we can navigate back and forth by pressing escape or Control Enter to go back and forth, but we are still staying in the same place, the terminology used in IDA. But with this unified location history, now we're supposed to be able to navigate across different places or different views. I'm not going to demo this one, it's not working as expected in this beta, which is fine. Bug has been reported. Next one on the list is the new Debugger registers widget. This one will apply coloring, dereferencing pointers, and tries to be smart about register values. I've seen a third-party plugin doing something similar. Sorry, I don't recall the name of that plugin, but I've seen this before as well. So let's demo this. So for this one, we need to be running the debugger. I have Windows Debugger selected. I hit F9. I'm already in the debugger. Here what we can see in the general registers, we have the registers, and that's the smart dereferencing, or trying to be smart about what it displays. Now that's the new behavior. The old behavior we can revert back to by showing not showing annotations. So here this is the old behavior and this is the new behavior. Now the new behavior is trying to be smart. So for example, next to the IP, the instruction pointer, we get to see the symbolic name and the current instruction. For the stack pointer, we can see the dereferences, and you can see how many levels of dereferences, for example. That is controllable with the dereferencing options, the depth limit, and as well hide debugger segment names, if just to simplify the display name. So let's single step a bit more and see, for example, here AX is gonna be loaded to some pointer, and we can see here AX is pointing to our data and that string. Let's see, if we were to do it before this feature, I would have to follow the register. I would click on the register to see it. But again, the beauty of it is the multiple times dereferencing. So let's just keep a look. For example, error message here, output, and so on. We can see different stuff on the stack, different register values and pointers and so on. I think this is very useful, very handy. It saves us some time from having to navigate or even use the mouse to look at hints and see what's happening at those register locations. Next on the list is quality of life improvements and just some conveniences when we are using the local types. That's gonna add completion in the local types. I assume with this ability, maybe in the future we might have completion in the snippet window, for example. So let me demo this real quick. So we're gonna hit Shift F1, local types, insert or edit. Let's just insert for now and go to the freestyle here so we can type it. That's where we're supposed to have the completion. So if I type struct, for example, str, and I have struct. Now I can name it, for example. I'm gonna open the braces. Notice it will close it automatically. So here, open brace, it's closed automatically. Now let's say we define a basic type int, for example. So if I type int, I have those completed stuff being pulled from the local types as well and the basic types. So here, so let's suppose we can see here, let's say we're gonna take large integer. I don't want to type the whole thing, so I can just type control space if I want to directly show the completion and type large int and li1, for example. And the same story, we can see the offsets here and the size of the structure. So that's nice. We can always invoke that to do the completion. Just some convenience. And here we have created it. Next on the list, we have a completely new widget, xrefgraph. It's supposed to let us see inter-function relationships, code and data. Now this reminds us of proximity view. But proximity view as of this beta is still left untouched. And maybe not many of you know what is proximity view and what it's used for. Let's leave that aside for now. So here is supposed to replace a bunch of existing stuff in IDA like the queuing graph, xref graphs from, graph to, function call graph, and user call graph. Let's take a look how that looks like. Let's invoke the xref graph with Alt Shift X, and here we go. This is main. This is where we invoke that functionality from the function main. And it's supposed to let us see the relationship between our function and the relationship to other functions and data. And so here main, for example, has relationship to the string dummy, another string here. We have access to security cookie. You can see outgoing is gonna call dbopen, which as well we can see dbopen itself is gonna invoke this, and it stopped a bit here, dbopen, for example, not too much, which we can right click on dbopen and add xref from node. So that will let us expand that current xref graph to show us dbopen where it leads to. So from dbopen to where, and that expands that exploration more. I find this very, very handy. For example, let's see as well from main, which went to dbopen, went to fread. Let's expand it as well. We can see, for example, fread is calling fread safe, and we can expand it. It's using a structure, for example, etc. Now, we can also configure with right click and option. We have control here. What do we want to show? For example, let's say I don't want to see the data elements like those strings in green color. So we can get rid of the data elements. Of course, if we hide the code, it's useless, but that's what it is. So we can get rid of this, for example, and so on. And we can control as well how the animation looks like. Here you can see it's springy and so on. We can also suspend the animation or resume it. So if we suspend the animation, it's a bit freestyle. You can do just arrange it as you want, but then once you resume the layout, it will obey those attributes in here. So this is not done. Let me show you from another function. So now suppose we are already in main and I want to continue the exploration. And that's the behavior as of today. And I would love it to be better than that. Then it mimics the proximity viewer I've been talking about here, which by design proximity browser was supposed to let us do what I'm now expressing. I wish this one does it, but I've shared the feedback and hopefully that will be improved in the next beta. So what would be a nice workflow is if I'm in main and discovered functions, I might want to drill down and make the second function, let's say dbsave here, as my central node. So now if I double click, it doesn't take me to another xref graph. Instead, it takes me back to disassembly. But really, I would have loved to stay in the xref graph. So I am left with no choice but to re-invoke it again. And as well here, this is shortcoming from the beta. Hopefully it will be improved. If I press Alt-Shift-X, I'm presented with a dialog and the workflow is a bit slow here. Then I have to hit new, which inserts the current function. Then I have to select it and press open. It's a very slow workflow, and the feedback I gave hopefully will really minimize all this workflow and lets you just stay inside the same view. So if I, let's say, navigate further into DBOpenS, I don't have to go through that step again, which is slows you down as a reverser, forces you to use the mouse versus the keyboard. Like if you're using IDA, it's best to keep using the keyboard and operate as fast as you can without having to move the mouse and click buttons and so on. So hopefully this will improve. But this is the gist of the xref graph and I'm really excited about it, hopefully with some improvements in the next version. Next on the list is another as well exploration widget, I would say, is xref3. Is a bit similar to the xref graph, but it's gonna use tree view instead. And this is supposed to replace function calls and cross references. Let's take a look at how that works. So here I'm inside main. I'm gonna press Shift X, which gonna open the xref tree. And here it is. Now we have main and cross references leading to main is the CRT common main, makes sense. Then cross references from main, meaning main and where it goes to. And so if I just scroll under this assembly, for example, it's gonna access default DB name, a bunch of strings, a bunch of functions, which we can see here, which is a function, string access, and so on. If we expand this function here, nothing happened. Let's see here. That this function here now is displaying the child dbopen and only the cross references from. So it's telling us dbopen where it's going to. fclose, which is a nested one, where it's going to as well, xres from. Now, ideally, the feedback I got was as well, why not inside the child also show cross references to and from. So instead of just showing the from, also have refs to and from, for example, so we can even see the same stuff that we see for the top level, but also for the children. Why the children only have the just from. And another caveat for this beta is one would expect if we jump here, it should take us to the use inside main. So if I jump to my string compare, which if we look, for example, this is one use in it, and there are other uses in that function, but in that case here, if I jump, it's taking me to the definition, which defies the purpose for now. So if I press Ctrl-X again, now I can go back. So this has been as well reported. It's gonna be improved in the coming version. But other than that as well, this is pretty handy and very good for explorations. Very handy for big databases, code you're not familiar with, and so on. Now as well, there are a bunch of options. We can synchronize this with IDA view, for example, and we can also control other display options. For example, hide the data items, or don't show the segment, see, completely hide the segment, and so on. Pretty handy. With little improvements, this feature is very, very useful. Next on the list It's just an announcement that IDA is now running Qt6. So here as well, for those who are beta testing like myself, that can break stuff. For example, I observed things with it's not respecting the color theme. So if you have dark color and IDA is white colors, and you'll have some weird visuals. So this is something maybe you should beta test. For example, test scenarios, remote desktop from, let's say, a Mac into Windows. I've noticed some weird behaviors, so as well your feedback is appreciated. Another convenience here is actions for font size. So back we could just right click font and change the font, and right click font. So we had to right click and select the font per widget. Now there's a hotkey, so we can press Ctrl plus or Ctrl minus. I find this very useful. Let's say if you're giving a training or presentation, it's very convenient to quickly increase the font size. Something I mentioned earlier is feature flag dialog. For now, this is only having one feature, but I'm assuming in the future this is gonna be something to let you enable or disable experimental features. So once IDA starts to ship maybe, let's say, nightly updates and so on, then you can experiment with experimental features and using that dialog. So this dialog here, we can go options and feature flag. And I expect in the future, maybe there'll be more stuff that we can enable, disable to experiment with new features before they are mature and live in their own proper functionality. Next on the list is sunsetting IDA. Now, this is sad news, but when I spoke to the teams, they have valid reasons. I expect this might come back in one way or another, but it's a big loss, and it's totally understandable. Maintaining this and also updating IDA code base will incur lots of technical work that maybe is not priority. So instead of IDA, you can still do something similar with IDA-lib. So it's not like a complete loss. But if you use SSH or a terminal, it would be nice to still have IDA text UI. But for now, it is gone. For those who are not familiar with IDA text UI, let me quickly show you. So I'm going to drop to the prompt and invoke a prior version of IDA, which has IDA-T. So I'm going to just invoke IDA-T here and test.pe, let it run. And this is the text interface. As you can see, it's pretty handy. It works on any terminal, even if you SSH and so on. And this doesn't necessarily keep up, meaning it doesn't have parity with the graphical interface, but it has enough stuff. Like if you've used IDA 3.x series, this was the primary user interface. But this is pretty solid in here, so you can have the decompiler, you can add comments, the same hotkeys work, you can close windows, you can cross references, everything. So this used to be IDA 3.x series before the GUI version. If you're interested in the IDA history and the progression, I have a video on my channel. Just look for IDA history. Next on the list is architecture support. I'm not gonna go into details about those architectures. I'm not an expert there. So if you really work with those stuff, I'm sure you'll appreciate all the new additions. And it's worthwhile mentioning that the IDA team always improves those. Every release, you'll see a big list of those little improvements, which don't necessarily get the full credit because they're not necessarily visible to the user, but this is important stuff. So good work, team. So more stuff, tricore, risk, and other things. Let's talk about the type system. Next on the list is a new parser. In prior versions of IDA, we had default and clang. Now in the beta, we have a third one, which is called future, which is heading to replace the default parser. The default parser was very basic, doesn't support C++ stuff, so no templates and class and so on, no virtual tables. Clang, on the other hand, you've had that since a long while back, maybe 8.0 or even before that. And you could also back then still parse templates, classes, virtual tables, etc., etc. So the future here is aiming to replace the built-in one completely with is gonna be the default parser, but way more powerful based on the lib tooling, which will provide us similar functionality as the power of the Clang parser. But Clang parser is implemented externally as a plugin. And hopefully the future will become internal everywhere in IDA. So when you set a prototype, edit the types in the local types window and so on. So let me show you really quickly the parser here. I'm gonna show you the difference between default, Clang, and future, and how future is gonna position itself as the new default once the beta is over. So first, I'm gonna go to options, compiler, and source parser. I'm just gonna switch to the default. That's what is by default in the prior versions of IDA. Now I'll show you a simple header file I have devised here, just showing you some basic C++ syntax is template. We have template type, and then we specialize it here with unsigned int and a couple other base types. With this, I cannot parse this file with the default parser. So here the default parser, Ctrl-F9, I cannot parse it, of course, because it's a very simple C parser. But on the other hand, if I switch to Clang, and that's something you could have done since very older version of IDA, but just to show you, if I specify here C++ parsing pointer type, that will influence the pointer types and like size underscore t and stuff related to that. So pressing OK now, that's using the Clang parser, which you had access to from before, but now let's see, compile successfully. And let's go to the local types and go to, for example, here we can see it has been parsed nicely. Now the shortcoming here is, for example, let's just take this structure here. This structure doesn't have any advanced syntax, doesn't have like templates and stuff. So if I press Ctrl E to edit it and go to the C syntax, no complaints. And that type definition here is using the default parser. So no complaints, it works. But, and it will always, the editing here will always use the default parser. If I edit this, let me see here, Clang. Okay, yeah, so if it was default, let's see here, it should be complaining, yeah. Here it is, that's the complaint. Let's try Clang. As well as it's not, because it's still gonna use in that window, it's still gonna use the default parser, which doesn't support that syntax. So, but the future version will basically handle editing the types, setting prototypes and everything. So here it should have no issues at all editing it. There's some worrying about doesn't know like the pragma pack, whatever. But now let me close the database and open it again. And this time I'm gonna use the future parser directly. So it is already here by default selected. Let's keep it. I don't specify arguments for now. And if I Control F9 to parse and accept, it parsed. So we didn't have to go through the Clang parser here. So we didn't have to go through Clang. So this is also gonna be improving. I encourage you to file bugs, and this requires a lot of testing. Okay, next on the list, let's see. Python API, here we have, now we can use source length, set parser, parse decker with parser extension. You can specify the parser name and have it parse and introduce the parse types into the database for you. That's the point here of additional testing, because the default parser used to support special syntax, for example, argument location here, the user call convention and argument location syntax. These are stuff and other special syntaxes that default parser used to be able to handle. These are things that needs to be tested as you go. For the tuples parser, I clarified with hex arrays as well. This is something not fully documented here, and this potentially is going to support better Go binary disassembly and potentially decompilation. So I don't have more info on that. The disassembler decompiler integration. This is very interesting. I get asked about this kind of workflow scenario in the training a lot. And just in short, this is where, for example, if you already noticed, if you work in the decompiler and specify structure offsets in the decompiler and other annotations, and then if you switch back to the assemblies, they don't carry over. Now your changes that you do in the decompiler will be copied to the disassembler. Let me show you how that looks. So here right now I'm inside the function. Let me hit tab and the decompiler, and let's suppose here that already is annotated. We can see here DBA signature. We have other field access, number of entries, and so on. So if I hit tab today right now, these are structure offsets. Normally I would have to replicate that, so I would have to go to the here, so it is db underscore t. I would have to press tab and then press t, find db underscore t, and hit enter. Why would I have to repeat that work if that has been nicely applied in the decompiler? And that's where this new feature comes into play. So to enable this feature, which is documented to be disabled by default, so let's enable it. We're gonna go to the Hexrays options. I'm gonna press Ctrl+3 and then select Hexrays, and then it is hidden inside Option Analysis 2, and that's the option here. So once I enable it, IDA or the decompiler will copy those structure offset applications to the disassembly. So let's just apply it, press OK, and here we go. So now let me hit tab at that location to see it directly, and at least it applied it here. It should have applied it here. Let's refresh one more time. Let's see. Maybe because I touched it first by hand. Let me try to start over again. So just to see. Again, this is beta. I don't blame it. So let's try again. All right. Okay, so let's go options, compiler. We're gonna, this is here in the options, the compiler, this guy. All right, let's hit tab. Here it is. It worked. So probably a small glitch. It will be fixed hopefully in the next beta. Another big thing is major Golang analysis improvement. As well, I don't deal with Golang or Go binaries, but if you use Go, I'm sure you've been appreciating incremental improvements release after release. Ultimate name as comments as well. The obfuscation stuff. Here there's a nice blog post as well on the Hexrays website. I'll show it to you, where it shows how big of an improvement with this new algorithm to improve those cases. So here it is. We have that blog post from Alexandru, and you feel free to read it. It's a recent blog post, and they talk about what's new, how it used to look like, and how it is now, and the bigger improvements. So it helps with obfuscated cases. And as well, if you find bugs, you're encouraged to simply access the beta as a paid customer and file the bugs. Just directly report that. And that's in fact the purpose of this video, and that's what I'm doing, showing you the new features and discovering bugs along the way. Let me continue quickly with the rest of stuff. IDA feeds, it's now gonna recover more Rust compiler versions from the binary, so apparently a bit more detections what Rust binary, then it knows what signatures to apply. IDA lib as well, additional changes and so on, a major bug fix. And I had this bug as well in 9.1. I contacted support and they gave me a patch. So the point is, if you run into a blocking bug, the support team is always on top of things, so they might send you a patch. So again, I encourage you to keep in touch with the support team. APIs, additional APIs and so on, deprecated APIs, yet to see what's the replacement. Miscellaneous stuff and bug fixes, I'm not gonna go through those, but these are always massive. That shows you the amount of work that the Hexrays team is doing. Alright, so this was the video about 9.2 beta 1. This video is really just to show you the upcoming stuff, and as well to encourage you to submit bugs and participate in the beta test and give feedback, because your feedback will shape the final version. So again, this is no criticism whatsoever. It's valid. We run into small glitches here and there, and now that the glitches have been discovered, they will be fixed in the next version. And the next betas, if there are major changes that I need to highlight, I'm gonna post another video. Alright, thank you and see you next time.